everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Tundra Cast. This is, I believe, episode 94, and we're going to be doing, me and Nick are going to be doing our second mock draft for the upcoming 2024 NHL draft. Say hi, Nick.
Hi.
Yeah, so our system is going to be pretty similar to the one last time, except it's just going to be me and Nick. And this time we've done our top 30/32 players, and we've told their score with, the first ranked player having a point total of 32, all the way down to the 32nd ranked player who only gets 1 point. And for time's sake, we're only going to be talking about the top 25 players that we have in up to this point in terms of cumulative score. And we'll be talking a little bit about every player and, where we see them going in the upcoming draft. So without further ado, Nick, you want to take over pick number one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's pretty unanimous at this point, I think. MACKLIN CELEBRINI. I think he's going to be a superstar. I wouldn't say he's like a generational type in terms of like a McDavid or Bedard or a Matthews or whatever. But in terms of what he's done in the NCAA so far, I mean, think back years. I don't think I can think of at least a forward who has scored at his pace at his age. He's technically not even supposed to be in the NCAA. He's in there because he's had an advancement in all his classes. He can actually play for BU. So he was unbelievable last year in the UCHL, had an unbelievable World Juniors. He's had a great year so far this year. Just all around, just a dynamic player. Speed, skill, his vision, his IQ. He's got an underrated shot as well. He can really score. And like I said, unanimous player at this point. And I'm really glad that people are starting to kind of notice his talent a little bit more, because at the start of the year it was kind of like, oh, it's one of those bum first overall picks again, but it's really not. Like, he is a special kid, special player. And yeah, I don't know like a comparable for him. I haven't really figured that out yet. I had one in mind. I can't remember now.
I think it's probably Jack Hughes. I'd say Jack Hughes.
Okay, that's who it was. I knew it was a Jack. I almost said Jack Eichel. But yeah, I'm just trying to think. Like, I think the last player I've seen score this much, like this young, was maybe like Paul Kariya, and this is going back 30 years. So
yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of players come into the NCAA game and perform well, right? Jack Eichel went second, Fantilli went third. But I don't think we've seen someone at his age this refined and this dominant already at the NCAA level. I think his defensive awareness and positioning is already pretty good. And that's saying something, because most of the time these offensive dynamos high in the draft usually have a few deficiencies defensively, just from an awareness or commitment perspective. I think Celebrini doesn't really lack that. He's an explosive skater, and that's where the Jack Hughes comp comes from, right? He's got a great work rate. He battles for pucks. He's first to pucks a lot. Great board work. And whatever team drafts him is going to get a first line center, because that's what he's going to project to be. 35 goals, 90 plus points is definitely not out of the realm of possibility. And like Nick mentioned, at the World Juniors this year, he was far and away Canada's best player. And the kid's 17 years old.
Yeah.
And so, this, if it was a question before the World Juniors, by the time the World Juniors was over, it was no longer a question. This guy is definitely the number one player in the class.
I believe he's eligible for the U18s as well, so it'll be interesting. I don't know how far along the NCAA season goes. I feel like it ends earlier than the CHL season, so like, I don't know if he'll go, but it's just something to keep in mind. I mean, it'd be kind of cool. We'll just dominate.
For sure. All right. In second place, we have Ivan Demidov, and this is a guy that I've had pretty much in this spot since the start of the year. Obviously, he kind of fell off at times on other people's boards because of the injury issues. I don't think anyone doubted his talent, but my gosh, he's sick. He's got sick hands, elite vision. He's just so fun to watch. His side-to-side mobility is just incredible, and it makes it so difficult for defenders to defend him. He's creative, and he's great at finding space for himself and for his teammates. He's got a good shot. and I think he's killing it in the MHL recently, and I think he should be called up to the KHL at some point before
I
the year
wish
is
he was
over.
playing KHL, but he's been red hot. You're right. He's been
Yeah, I
unbelievable.
mean, he's there's some areas where, he could refine. I think a lot of players like him that are so dangerous with the puck on his stick. He tries to make the perfect pass or, do too much sometimes, a little bit like he likes to play shinny a little bit with the puck.
Mhm.
And he can get away with it oftentimes because he's so talented. But I think at the NHL level that he probably needs to tighten up and choose his spots more wisely. And like I mentioned, that wasn't an issue with Celebrini. I think Demidov's work rate away from the puck and defensively probably needs some work. But he's going to be available by 2025, and I just think he's a sick player.
100%. He's pretty versatile too. He can play wing. You can put him in the middle as well. Like you mentioned, super skilled. Red hot so far. I think the last 11 games he has like 20 something points. He's just been really good. And you mentioned it as well. He's there until 2025, I believe. So like you put him in the KHL next year, I think he's gonna do great in the KHL. The NHL is just such a funny league to watch sometimes. Whenever I'm like studying these guys, because you get like a guy like Demidov who's just unreal. You know he's unreal, but some of the highlights you watch in that game with some of the other players in that league is like just silly. It's a weird league, but yeah, he's a lot of fun to watch, and I have him second. I should say this isn't really like a final ranking for me. It's just kind of like where I have them for now because I just put out a 32 like last month, but
Yeah.
right now I think he's probably the second best player in this draft in terms of how hot of a streak he's been on and just how skillful and sick he is. I mean, I saw it before the start of the year. He just had some injury problems, so I wasn't able to watch him as much as I wanted to. But now that I've kind of been able to see him play a little bit, I can see the hype and I can understand really why he's ranked so high. So
I just hope he doesn't fall to Montreal by the time draft season comes along. I do
yeah,
not
we'll
want
see.
to deal with this kid for the next.
Fair enough.
Who knows? Can you imagine this kid with Uri Slavkovsky, Cole Caulfield, and Nick Suzuki
Ugh,
in that top six?
dirty,
Nightmare fuel. Nightmare fuel.
dirty.
And number three, I'm gonna let you take this one, Nick.
Oh
This is
God!
your
All right.
boy.
I feel like I glazed on him a lot in the last video, but I'll do it again. Why not? I think it, for Sam Dickinson, I still think all around, offensively, defensively, in the neutral zone, he's just dynamite in every zone. He's calm, he's composed, he plays like a pro. I think out of all games I've seen and I've been to, I think I've seen him get beat one on one once, but it wasn't really like really getting beat. He was just tired and coming off of a long shift. But um, he just there's just something about him that you just kind of similar to kind of like a guy like Oliver Bonk. Like he'll be under pressure by a guy, and you don't really have to worry because he's just going to get out of it. He's going to find a way to send a breakout pass. He's going to find a way to just get by players, get by opposing players. He's got amazing vision. He's got high IQ. Um, I think this is a guy that you take if you're building a team around defense. If you're building a decoy around one guy, I think that guy in this draft has got to be a guy like Sam Dickinson. Right hand shot. He's like 6'3" now. Almost going to be 200 pounds. Probably going to be over 200 pounds by the time it's all said and done. And I think he's a guy you can plug away. I think he's a minute muncher. He can get points, and he'll do it for 10, 15 years on your decoy if you really wanted to. Um, trying to think of more comparables. I think last year I said Petrangelo. I
Yeah.
remember Dougie Hamilton when he played in the OHL as well. He was really good, a real fast skater. Um, put away a huge amount of points in the OHL as well. I think he was OHL D-Man of the year after he was drafted. And I could totally see that for Dickinson as well if he goes back to the Knights. But I think for an NHL team to have that composed of a player that's a winner, um, you go back to the U18s as well on guys on the team like PAREKH, guys like Muse, guys like Yakimchuk were on that team. He was the best defender in that tournament, and he's kind of carried that wave all throughout. So um, I think he's the best defender available right now. I think it's close, but
Hmm.
maybe it's just because I've watched him so much. But um, he's just an unreal defender. I mean, it's really the same points I said last time. Nothing really much has changed, but um, yeah, just terrific all around.
The thing with Dickinson is just I think he's almost like the perfect build a defenseman. Like if you were
Yeah,
to build a defenseman in a lab, like this is what you get. I mean, I think I mean, outside of, I think he could be probably a bit more dynamic with the puck on his stick. I think there's a couple of guys that are gonna go high in this draft on the blue line that probably are stronger with the puck on their stick. But I don't think he's, it's something that's a weakness per se. I think the big thing about Dickinson, why I have him at number one versus a guy like Buyam or Yakimchuk or Parek is there is no weakness, right? With some of these other
Mhm.
guys, you can look at, whether it's their tools or their size or their commitment in certain aspects of the game. I think Dickinson plays real strong, right? He's hard to play against defensively. He's big. He's got great skating for his size. Four-way mobility. And there's not a lot of guys that can step in and play well, like a
Yeah,
prominent role as a 16-year-old, and that's what he did last year. And this year he's stepping into an even bigger role for them, and he's been incredible. And he's a guy I think is fine on the power play. You can play him on the power play. I think he can play penalty kill. He's got I think he's got the highest floor out of all the defensemen in this draft class. And depending on how the development goes, he might have one of the highest ceilings too. And with that, because he's got so many tools in his toolbox too, right? It's not just, oh, he's big and he can skate, right? He's got vision, he's got passing, gap control is great, physical defensively. I agree. He's been my number one defenseman as well, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon.
yeah. He's got a hard shot. You can put on power play, PK, like you said. Four-way mobility is great. At the combine, at the prospects game, he was among the top in terms of all the skating, and all the strength ones, I think, as well. I'm trying to remember exactly. I know with the puck, he was the fastest skater from blue line to blue line. Um, and that's
Ooh,
saying a lot as well. He can really skate like the wind too. If you ever watch him play, it looks like
yeah,
yeah. He's an unreal defender. But yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next player there.
yeah. So we
Uh,
got we got two guys here. One of them is more my guy, and one is more your guy.
all
So maybe we'll let you go with Hellenius first, and then I'll
right.
talk a bit about Bouillon.
Yeah, you're a big boom guy. I think with Hellenius, it's just kind of the same points. I think with Hellenius, he's not like a super flashy player. Um, but he scored at such a high rate. He just knows how to get to the right areas. He gets to the dirty areas quite often already in a men's league, and this is a men's league that's pretty underrated in my opinion. There's been players in the past that have scored, kind of like what Shay said in the last video, that have scored in this league at a high level and just hasn't really translated to the NHL game. What I think Hellenius does really well is how well he forechecks, how well he engages. He wants the puck on his stick, and like I said, not flashy, but he'll use his body, he'll use his strength. He's not an overly big guy either, but he plays like it. He's just really good at getting to the dirty areas, and he can score goals that way, and he can make plays. Um, and in terms of a finished player in that league, there hasn't been one that scored at his rate. I think he's slowed down a little bit since, say, like World Junior time or the start of the year. And I think his World Juniors was a lot better than what people perceived it as, just because he wasn't scoring. He was creating chances. I think he was just a little bit snake bitten in that tournament as well. I
Yeah,
still think he's a top five pick. I think in Bob McKenzie's ranking, and I'm going to reference that a lot because it's a really accurate ranking. I think they had him like seventh or eighth or something like that, and that's like kind of more realistic in a sense. But I think if you're looking, there's not a lot of like top six guys in the
yeah.
forwards this year. But I think Hellenius is one of them. I think his floor is really high compared to a lot of their players in this draft. Um, I'm a bigger fan of him just for those reasons. Really, he's kind of like one of those players you don't always notice, but he just kind of gets the job done, whether it's in his own zone, in the offensive zone, stick him on the power play. He'll just find a way to get the job done. Um, yeah, that's basically all I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it was a more forward heavy class, I think Hellenius might be someone that probably doesn't go in the top 10,
Sure.
just from an upside perspective, because I still think that he's going to be, I have him ranked sixth, so it's not like I have him ranked like astronomically lower than you. I do project him as more of a north south player 5-on-5. He doesn't have that wiggle to his game. He shows the creativity that sometimes you're looking for from a guy you're taking this high in the draft on the power play. And I'm wondering if potentially his style of play is more direct because of the fact that he's playing in a men's league, and for him, it's more important of being responsible and making the right play, right, chipping the puck in, and opting more on the safe play and the risk versus reward spectrum than trying to flash attack players one on one, because it is a men's league, right,
Mhm.
and it's probably a top three men's league outside of the NHL. um I think he's got a great work rate, and I think the thing with him that separates him from the rest of the class is, I think outside of Celebrini, Demidov, him, and maybe one or two other guys, I think that he's a rare combination of, he's got a high floor, but I don't necessarily think his ceiling is capped as a third line forward. If that makes sense. Like, I
Yeah.
can see him in a top six role as a complimentary guy, you know. Whereas for some of these guys that are lower in the draft that have kind of like that similar high floor, I do think their ceiling is more limited. Or with some of these guys that are under him, they might have a higher ceiling, but their floor is certainly lower than his. So I think he's struck that really nice balance of just being extremely hardworking, but still flashing some traits on the power play with some vision, where you think, you know what, like, this guy could be a top six producer and not necessarily just a guy who's just wins his minutes and doesn't do much elsewise, right?
Hmm.
So I like Hellenius a lot too, but a guy I like a lot more is Yves Boyum, and boy oh boy, we just had Nick talk about Sam Dickinson for like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm a talk a little bit about my boy Zeve here.
He's having a
He's
season for the ages. I'll say that he is. I
so
think.
productive. He's been
Yeah.
so productive for
I think.
Denver in
I
this
think
season.
analytically, he's the best defenseman in the class. Analytically,
Yeah,
I feel like the prospect analytics are still like kind of like. There's been a couple that I've seen that have been like kind of like I'd say inaccurate. Just,
yeah.
but I
Very
think with
production
William,
focused.
yeah, yeah, exactly, and very league focused as well and ice time focused. So you'll see guys in Europe that are like 0% chance being an NHLer. It just like doesn't make sense. But anyways, I'll let you take the floor here.
Yeah, I mean, I think in there he has a legit. I think there's a couple of guys that have a legit. If you took the top 3 or 4 guys from this year's draft class for defensemen and then just move them into last year's draft class, I think there's a legitimate shot that pretty much every single one of them are the number one defenseman taken off the board. Um,
Oh yeah.
he's Buyam is, I think he's incredible with the puck. He's not the fastest, I don't feel, but like Demidov, like he's got a bit of a shiftiness to him. He's 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 outside of PAREKH. I don't know if there's another defenseman in this draft class that's as dangerous as Buyam is as a play driver with the puck on his stick entering the zone. It's not just he can make a nice entry pass from his own zone and start a breakout. He's a guy who can take the puck, wheel through a couple defenders, find a nice pass to the boards for a waiting forward, or he'll cut into like the dangerous trapezoid area and risk a snapshot on goal. And I just think he sees the game and thinks the game super well. He can pick passes against the grain and get fit it through sticks and defenders to open teammates. The one that comes immediately to mind is the one where he against the game against Norway in the World Juniors, where he kind of straddled the blue line and then shoveled a pass through to Will Smith for that first goal. And you can tell he's not afraid to jump into the action by bringing the puck in, but I think he picks his spots really well and he recovers really well when play goes the other way. He's not a Makar or a Hughes, and there's very few players that can be, but he's got a great lateral movement, and he focuses his game around generating shots and dangerous opportunities, so primarily the slot. And he's done well as a power play quarterback for Denver. I think he showed a lot of growth and good things. Power quarterback in the second power play unit for the U.S. at the World Juniors, and he's really good defensively from a transitional perspective. He's got a really active stick, and he can really sense pressure and find space for himself. And he's just never out of position. He's super cerebral. He sees the game super well. And from a he when he's through his thought process, he oftentimes he's able to create opportunities for himself and his teammates while still mitigating the risk that comes with taking those chances. The only thing that might kind of diminish him is the fact that he's not super big or physical, and so his ability to consistently win board battles and handle net front pressure might be kind of depending on how he's able to adapt to that at the NHL level with more physical guys, is going to be really indicative of just how good he can be. But I really think that this is a guy who could grow into one of the best offensive defensemen in the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go through my notes here as well. Like you said, he's electric. He's always moving his feet. He's really good at creating space for himself and for other players. You mentioned the goal against Norway. He kind of drags a defender towards him, and he's able to find that open pass lane for just a nasty assist, you know, and especially in the D zone. And I say this about Dickinson as well. When he's under pressure, he just finds a simple little breakout pass, you know, really good transition play. And that's part of a defenseman's job is to shovel that puck up to a forward. And Buem's really, really good at finding an open man. Anyone in the D zone, he could be pinned by a guy, or he could be, you know, it doesn't matter really. Buem's going to find a way to get that puck to his forward or to his defensive partner and get the puck out of the zone. You know, he's really agile. I don't think he's an overly quick skater, straight line,
Yeah.
but overall, the way he can walk the line and drag defenders, it's dynamic. He is a dynamic player for sure, and I think he's having the most productive year by a draft eligible college player among defensemen ever, which is insane. So
Insane.
I think he's again, like you mentioned, there's a lot of really good defensemen in this draft, and Boyum's kind of solidified himself as among the top. So, whereas start of the year, I think he was probably in like our 20s or so. I don't
I
even
mean,
think he was even in
I
my
think
first round at all.
I
So,
had him at 9, but I
okay,
think outside of that, most people didn't really have him pegged as that
yeah,
high.
Denver's a really good program too. They've won championships and they've developed some really good players there as well. I think Jack Devine plays on Denver, and I had him
Yeah.
as a good player in that draft. He went in the seventh round, I think. So there you go. Yeah. Moving
Uh,
forward, you have him seventh, I am sixth. Artsam Levshinov. I can talk about him for a little bit. I think he's kind of in the same mold as Sam Dickinson in the sense that he's a very complete defenseman in all three zones. He takes plenty of dashes in the offensive zone. He's really mobile for a larger defenseman like him. You'll see him especially in the power play. If he has enough space, and he doesn't need a lot of space to make things happen, he's very deceptive with his eyes. He'll do like a lot of little head fakes, or he'll look a certain way that drags the defender really out of position and out of proportion for him to make a pass or make a shot. Um, you know, he's got good vision. He's got crisp, fast passing, and like I said, it doesn't he's really good at getting away from pressure to make those things happen. I think it's a little bit overzealous when it comes to pinching and attempting to keep pucks in the zone. There's been a couple games I've watched where it's happened kind of consistently where he'll miss a pinch and he'll have to kind of skate back, or it leads to a rush, or you know, either way, another opponent's getting the puck. So I guess he just kind of overskates the play a little bit. Defensively, he's got a tendency to kind of fall back, kind of puck watches a little bit sometimes, I think. But um, I think the thing with Levshinov, the thing he's got to work on is just kind of calming down a little bit. He's really good at doing the fancy deceptive stuff, but there's times where he kind of overdoes it. Um, I will say he's gone up in my rankings. I think he's been a little bit more consistent as of late, but I remember early on watching him, it wasn't quite as consistent in terms of his overall play. He uses his body pretty well as well, and he's having a great year with Michigan State. Um, and that's pretty much all the notes I have on him. But like same thing as Buem, really. He just always keeps his feet moving as well. He always finds space for himself and for others. Um, and I think he can be a productive defenseman in the league. Could be a defenseman that plays right out of the draft. He may play one more year for Michigan State, but this is a guy I could see playing in the NHL next year personally. So
yeah, I mean he's great. I think his offensive ceiling is not as high as Boyum's, and I think
Yeah,
that's partially the only reason why I have Boyum as my number two defenseman instead of and him as my number three. But he's got all the physical tools, and defensively, he's it's taken him some time to kind of figure out the how to play defense at an effective level, but I think I think he's managed to do it, and he's probably one of the better defensive defensemen in this year's draft class. I think from a consistency perspective, especially near the top of the class. Um, he plays with a lot of panache, a lot of confidence, which I like. He's got a bit of a flair to his game, and he's not afraid of being physical too, like Dickinson. I do think his decision making is ultimately why I don't see him as favorably as a guy like Boyum or Dickinson. I think he's more prone to mistakes. You've mentioned with the pinching and
yeah.
sometimes being out of position. I think sometimes his decision with the puck, he's great with it, but it gets a little bit dangerous
He's got
sometimes.
to pick
And
his he's got to pick his spots to do it really,
yeah,
and that's kind of the point I made as
yeah,
well. So
yeah. I think he's got all the talent, and I think on a team where I think he's another guy that you could build your blue line around. Uh, I just think that he's probably a number one right defenseman. Um, but and I think he probably doesn't matter who you put next to him. I think he's going to be able to adapt because of his physical gifts, and he can play offense, he can play defense. Um, I just think the decision making needs to come together. And his it comes together, and he needs to pick his spots a bit better for him to come up in my rankings.
all right.
Um, Oh boy, this one's an interesting one.
Okay. Caden Lindstrom, I guess we'll start with him as well, and we see Eiserman there as well, and how big of a gap there is between my rankings and Ryan's rankings. But I'll start with Lindstrom first. He's gone down in my rankings, but that's no fault of his play. There's just a lot of really good defensemen in this draft that have gone higher than I've liked a lot better since my rankings. But Lindstrom, I'm going to mention Silayev here, and I know he's not here yet, but I think with Lindstrom, there's a lot of qualities for a bigger guy like him that not a lot of forwards can do of his size. At 6'5", he's already a tremendous skater. He already plays the puck really well. He uses his strength. He finishes his checks. Um, he uses his mobility really well. Tenacious forward. Always tries to get in front of bodies to retrieve pucks. He's always using his stick to kind of block passing lanes, and he's already pretty good defensively in that regard as well. And one-on-one, he's really good. Offensively, he's creative. You think of a guy, I think Shea compared him a little bit to Tage Thompson in the
Yeah,
sense
I
that
compared them to Tage.
he's not, yeah, he's not like he's maybe not, maybe still a little bit raw. I think of a guy like Connor Geeky, who was really big, but also really raw, but had really good skating for his size and skill and all that. So Lindstrom's kind of the same in that mold. But I think if all goes well at Lindstrom, he ends up on the right team. You're looking at a number two center one day down the middle. And I think he's picked up an injury lately. We were talking about that
Yeah,
too. I don't know how
upper
serious
body.
it is, which kind of stings a little bit in terms of his trajectory with NHL scouts. But I think at this point, I think he's my highest forward at this point, or second highest forward next to Eisenman and Celebrini, obviously. But in terms of guys after them, I think he's my highest centerman with him and Catton. Him and Catton have been like neck and neck with me, but um, yeah, Lindstrom. I'm on the hype train with Lindstrom. I can see I can see the hype around him now. He's been pretty good up until his injury, which stings. But
Yeah. I
that's
mean,
just the draft for you. Sometimes
he's like Byfield, Thompson, that kind of speedy, rangy,
I
smooth
could see
skating,
Byfield.
silky hands. Um, and like Byfield and Thompson, he's probably gonna need some time to kind of grow into his body and figure out his strength and how to leverage his strength. And I think he already does a decent job of that at the WHL level in terms of just driving play to the net with his size and using that to create opportunities for himself. And he knows how to use that reach in order to kind of shield defenders away and get shots off that most players wouldn't be able to. I think he's got a real active stick defensively, but I do think that there is a place for him to be able to use that size and frame of his more effectively, especially along the boards, just to leverage his size and make it more difficult for guys along the boards to when he's defending. But he's got a real strong base for skills. I think of him more favorably than a guy like Connor Geeky because Geeky, for me at least, when he first came out of the draft, I was a bit concerned about his skating from a north-south perspective, and I don't have that kind of concern for Lindstrom. The injury might tank his value a little bit for scouts or from general managers who are saying, "Oh, he's already raw. He's going to miss a couple months of development. We're going to be behind the eight ball here." But with a guy like him, you're going to have to be patient with him anyways, because even though he's dominating right now at the WHL level, coming to the NHL, he's gonna have a pretty steep learning curve because he's gonna realize that he can't dangle through everybody at the NHL level. There are a lot of guys that are super strong and super fast. So I think he's got great hands though, and he's the tool belt, the tool set is there, and so I'm not too concerned. But yeah, I think this is a guy who could be your number two center on a cup winning team, and I think he's another weapon on the power play too, and I think he can be super dynamic.
Yeah, I think the Byfield comparable is a good one. The thing with Byfield is that he was at like 16, 17 already way too good for the OHL. I think him being on the Kings, I mean, they had a lot of center depth at that time as well, so he just wasn't getting a ton of opportunity there. Um, it's a really good year for the WHL as well. There's
Oh
multiple
yeah,
guys that could go in the first round, and I think the similarity between all of them is that they're all really good one on one. Guys like
yeah.
again, guys like Lindstrom, Catton, even a guy like if you want to go to Ryder Ritchie, for example, also really highly skilled. That can beat guys one on one. So maybe that's a trend we see in this draft is that you're not going to be able to succeed as well as often one on one in the NHL or even the AHL, for example. So um, all right, Cole Eiserman. Do you want to take this one, or should I take this one? This is going to
I'm
be a
I'm
bit
a,
of a
I'm a start, and then you can kind of bring it back to probably within normal reason.
okay. All right.
Um, I'll be the first to admit that 10 for Iserman is a little low. There's like two guys that I have above him where in hindsight I'm thinking, you know what, like he's probably got the higher floor than both of them just because of that elite shot that he has. Like you can't turn down 30 goals, guaranteed 30 goal score just because he's not consistent in other aspects of his game. But that's the thing with Eiserman, right? Like when you think of Cole Eiserman, you think of that shot, and it's gonna be one of the best in the NHL as soon as he steps in. I can't dispute that. For me, like he's got moments, man. Like
Mm-hmm.
when he really gets going and he's engaged in the game at both ends. Like you can see why, like for most of the year leading up to this one, it was him and Celebrini as one or two. Um, and he's an extremely powerful skater. He's got an AHL size body, and he's always a threat to score, right? But at the end of the day, for me at least, his compete level is something that just comes and goes like on a whim during a game.
It's
When
true.
he's engaged, when he's going, when he's got a goal, and he's hunting for another one, he's a guy who can back check and skate with pretty much any player. But most of the time, he's not super attentive when he doesn't have the puck, and he's just coasting out there for me. And sometimes even when he is engaged defensively, he gets caught chasing the play, he's out of position, and I don't think he's a great play driver. I think he's capable, but I don't think he's a game breaker by any means in that aspect. And he's not super physical despite having an NHL sized body. And for me, he often looks like a passenger on his line, right? He's the guy who stands there, watches his teammates, generate the play, and then he's kind of like the finisher. And I just how high can one truly elite / borderline generational talent, like skill set, take you in a draft as deep as this one? I don't know. 10 may be a little bit too much, but
Yeah,
I I'm not sold on him just yet. He's got
I
a lot
will.
to show me.
I will say, in terms of his goal scoring, it's obviously probably the best in the draft. I mean, you don't exactly want to pass up on a goal per game guy if you have that chance. Um, Really good one on one. He's dynamic, I think. I think his skating's fine for a guy that just loves to shoot the puck and can score from just about anywhere. Um, I do agree with him not being too engaged. I When I had Eiserman at 2, I got a lot of people. I wouldn't say a lot, but I had some people being like, "Why is Eiserman at 2? Eiserman at 2 is way too high. He's not engaged enough. He just kind of coasts and doesn't back check, doesn't really forecheck, and cheats for offense." So I've kind of gone back and watched him, or tried to watch him a little bit more, and I can kind of see where they're coming from. To me, he screams Phil Kessel, and Phil Kessel's not a bad player at all. But Phil Kessel in his draft here was going to be the #1 guy, and then it kind of turned into, oh, he's a little bit lazy, and like you said, he's a passenger on his line. He kind of just sits there and waits for the puck so he can shoot it and score. And he fell because of that. He went like 5th overall. He was going to go first, and he fell. Um, I think of a guy like Vasily Podkolzin, who in his draft year, I didn't really watch a ton of Podkolzin um, in that draft, but people were saying, oh, when he's on it, he's the best player in the draft, or a top 5, top 3 player in the draft, but he's inconsistent. And I think that's the biggest word for him, is inconsistent. I think his play away from the puck really is raw. But I think of a guy like James Van Riemsdyk as well, who went 2nd overall in his draft, played a couple years in college, and ended up doing pretty well in the Leafs. He went to the Stanley Cup final with the Flyers. He's having a career year right now with the Bruins. Um, I think Eisenman can go just about anyone in this draft. He's a prime contender to slip in this draft. I'm not. I think he's going to be right in the middle of that top 10 for me. I do think he's a top 10 pick, regardless. Um, Top 5, I can see it. I can see a team like the Ducks, if they were picking that high. They have a lot of defensemen
True.
in their core already. They could probably use a guy like Eiserman. You stick him next to Zegras once he's healthy again, and that could be something right there. But I think it's going to take maybe a year of college. It doesn't hurt ever. It's not always the worst thing in the world.
True.
Um, Maybe at 2nd year of college, he'd be playing at Boston University, which is a really good school. Celebrini's there right now. He won't be there next year, but guys like Willander will be there. He'll have a lot of talent that he'll play with. So it'll be interesting to see by this time next year is if he. I think if he works on those defensive skills and works on his play away from the puck. I had a thought and it just slipped away. But anyways, Eisenman is just one of those weird players in this draft where you want to believe that he's really, really good and goal per game guy, but might be a bit of a one trick pony and whatever. And I felt that about a guy like Owen Tippett as well. Owen Tippett was a guy that I thought was a one
Hey,
trick pony.
yeah, he just got
Scored.
paid.
Yeah, he just got paid. So I mean, we'll see with Eiserman. He could. I think he's either just going to be a superstar goal scorer, 30, 40 goal scorer guy, or he's just going to not be much at all. And I don't think there's any in between. So it's really boomer bust for Eiserman. So that scares me a little bit, but yeah, it's going to be weird. It's going to come right down to the wire, I think, with Eiserman. There's fans of his, and there's
He's just a
kind of
tough player to evaluate, man, because
yeah,
he's got some special talent, but he just needs to get the rest of his game together a little bit, just from a consistency perspective. Because you can see
yeah,
it. That's the thing with
yeah.
Eisman. Like, I can see him at 4. Like, I can see a team looking at him and being like, hey, if we can get his mind right, hone in on his compete level, like, we believe in him, we'll take him at 4, right?
Maybe the Habs draft him. Imagine like Caulfield and Eiserman on the same top 6. Like, how nasty is that? You put Caulfield on one line, you put Eiserman on the other line, and you
Let's
just
not put
score
that out
goals.
there.
All right, all right, I know.
Let's not put that.
Fair enough.
Also, you want to
Anyways.
lean a little bit more into the mic, by the way. I think you're fading a little bit again.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry, I'm just
Yeah, all good,
There we
all
go.
good.
All right. Anyways, still getting used to this mic.
Yeah, no worries. Berkeley Catton is next, who I have above Iserman. Um, and I think this is just a guy who I think his vision and his hockey IQ is probably his best calling card. And he just finds a way to produce. When I look at him, he's always moving in the positive direction. His feet are always moving. He's always generating opportunities for his teammates. Um, and there's not a lot of unnecessary movement to his game that sometimes I think a guy like Lindstrom may be guilty of. Um, I just think he doesn't have he's kind of like the inverse of Eiserman. Like there's not one true dynamic slash elite trait that I can point out about Catton. But I just think his hockey IQ and his awareness, and his ability to just be in the right spots, is going to allow him to carve out a pretty long and successful career in the NHL, probably in the middle six role.
Yeah, I think he's been a player that I've had my eyes on a few years. He went first overall in the Western Hockey League draft, and that's always kind of a good start. That's a good spot to kind of start evaluating players when they're 14, 15 years old. Um, he's a responsible player. He's one of the better playmaking forwards available. He's got a really good stride. He can get around defenders that way. Like he's not. I think I agree with you. Like he's not typically elite in a certain area, but he's got really really good attributes about him. Um, he's not highly skilled, but like I said, he uses that stride to kind of get around defenders, and he's hard to kind of keep track of in that sense. I will say as well about Spokane, I hate the plus minus rating. I hate it. Yeah, but he's a plus 33. Spokane has a losing record. They're 17 and 22. So
Yeah.
he's a guy that can put his team on his back, make everyone around him better. Um, players like that are first line centermen. And
Hey, I
with
mean, look at what
Cat
he did at the Holinka Gretzky Cup, right? Like,
100%, and he could potentially play in the U18s this year, and I think he'll dominate there. And I just with Cadden, I think with Lindstrom being as high, I still think they're neck and neck, in my opinion. They're very different players,
yeah,
um, but Cadden has that ability to take over a game, and he has that ability to kind of. I think he's a little more polished than Lindstrom,
yeah, I
but you
agree.
like the size
There's
of
that
Lindstrom a little bit.
efficacy to his game.
Yeah, 100%, and um, yeah, we'll see with Catton, but I think moving forward, a team's going to be really happy if he ends up sliding, down to the 10th spot or outside of the top 10. You never know with the draft nowadays. It takes one team to like someone a little bit better. But I've been a big fan of Catton for a couple years, and like you said, Ivan Alinka dominated. He's doing really well in the WHL. Um, I look at guys that went last year in the first round for the WHL, guys like Jaeger, maybe a guy like Height maybe should have gone a lot higher than he did, that
Hey,
were high end
yeah,
scorers in the league. Cohen Zimmer is another one that's playing pretty well, or was playing pretty well. He's injured now, but
yeah,
um, yeah, I think out of all the offensive forwards, I think his ceiling is really high, and I think he'll be one of the more productive ones. So I'm a big fan of him, although he's 10th. Like I said, just a lot of freaking good defensemen in this
yeah.
draft, but he'll probably end up being a lot higher by the time season's end. So
Yeah. I mean, he's got all the intangibles. Like,
he does.
you know what I mean? Like when I watch him, he's just smooth and he's hard to cover, but like you can't really pick out particularly like what it is. Like with Eisner, you
Yeah,
can tell like it's the goal scoring, right? With
yeah.
Lindstrom, it's that size, speed, skill combo. With Catton, it's just he just finds a way. He's always in the right spot. He always finds the right pass. He creates opportunities. He doesn't make many mistakes, and he just raises the level of play of whoever he's playing with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a winner. And NHL teams love winners in their locker room and on their team. I think that's an aspect that's severely underrated about him.
100%. All right,
Moving on to number 10.
Zane Parek. Now, with Parek, I've seen some boards where he's really high. I think I've seen him as high as like third overall, and
Second.
second. That's yeah, yeah. Like
I think Hattie had him at second.
you might be right. Maybe that's who I'm thinking of. Anyways, um, I watched Zane Parek. I watched Saginaw play in London. Now Saginaw got killed in that game. London beat them like 6-1, I think it was.
Yeah.
But Parek's going to be playing a lot of hockey, and so there's going to be a lot of time to kind of look at him. He's going to be playing Memorial Cup. Saginaw's going to look to make a big run in the OHL playoffs as well. Um, I'll say this about Parek is his skating is probably the best among not only defenders but forward and I meant like among players in this draft. It's because it's so unique and he's able to just move around so well. Um, I think I tweeted about this as well. When he skates, he stands like almost straight up the whole
Upright,
time. It's
yeah.
so weird, but it's so effective, and he's able to stay balanced. His reach is pretty good still for just being upright all the time. But like,
The
how do
puck
you guess
sticks to
where?
his stick too. Like the puck
Yeah,
just doesn't move.
I know. It's he can walk the line so well. There's a there's a term for skillful player. Puck on a string. Is that what it is? I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like
that's almost what it feels like. And he's a shooter. I think he's got like 23 goals already in the OHL. Like at this stage is crazy. He's probably gonna be like a 30 goal scorer by the time it's all said and done. It doesn't need much time to get that shot off. He'll like do a little stick handle, on the forehand and just let the shot go. And he lets a low shot go where he's looking for rebounds, he's looking for a tip. Um, and on the power play, moves around super well all the time. He's just always getting towards pucks, using that stick and using that speed. And like how as a defender, when he's standing like that, how do you guess where he's gonna go? Like his feet are pointing in like two different directions all the time. He's standing upright. Like you have no idea where he's going. He's just so deceptive. He's so dynamic in the offensive zone. Defensively, I think I was a little bit harsh on him. I don't think he's particularly active with his body, but I don't think you're getting Parek for that. I think you're getting Parek
yeah.
for how dynamic he is, and that's things you can work on as you develop. I mean, he could be in the OHL another year or two. We'll see what happens with him. Um, I think he's good along the boards. I think he's underrated along the boards. There were a couple times in that London game, I will say, where he kind of got caught with his head down. He got drilled in that game as well.
Yeah.
Um, Under pressure, he's fine. I think again, he's just able to use his speed so well to break out of his own zone. But if you catch him at the right time, you can kind of catch him off guard a little bit. Um, and like these are like really little things in the defensive zone that I've just noticed. I don't think he's bad defensively
Yeah.
at all, but like he's in the right areas. And like maybe, like I said, maybe not as active as you'd like him to be, but I mean he's just a dynamic enough player where you're not gonna rely on him for that. You're gonna put him on the power play. You're gonna put him in your top four possibly one day in the NHL top pairing, and he's gonna plug away. He's gonna score. Um, yeah, he's a legitimate OFD, and he's an unreal player. He's having an unreal year with Saginaw, which is I'm really happy for him because at the start of the year it was going to be tough to kind of see what he identifies as. He scored 21 goals as a rookie last year, the most out of any OHL defenseman under 16. And that's highly notable when you look at the defensemen that have played in the OHL in the past. So,
Right.
but I'm really happy he's had a great year, and I've bumped him up my rankings because I think I was being a little harsh on him at this time a month ago. But now that I've watched him more, I can kind of see the hype. He's a different player among the other OFDs in this draft, in my opinion. He just has different attributes and different intangibles about him that really stand out, and I think are going to make him succeed at the next level.
I think he's definitely the best offensive defenseman in this year's class. I think the thing about him is that he's not bad defensively, but I think it's kind of a case where he does just enough defensively where you're not absolutely terrified of what would happen if he gets stuck in the defensive zone on a shift, right? Like as a coach, you're not going, oh my god, just get the puck out and change. Like I think he's good enough defensively where that's not a factor. As a Leafs fan who's watched Tyson Barrie play games for his hockey team, that is a pure offensive defenseman. Like that's a guy who cannot play defense. I think for Parek, like his biggest issue defensively is kind of like Barry-esque in the sense of he's not super physical, and sometimes the body language makes it look like he's not really that interested in playing defense, and he'd rather get the puck and do what he does offensively. That you've gone into really great detail, and he's probably the best in that half of the ice in this draft class.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the thing is, like for defensively, like I think he's been okay on the penalty kill. I don't think he's been terrible there, and I think he's got a good stick, and he communicates really well defensively, and his ability to make that first pass out of the zone is good. I think puck retrievals is can be a bit of an issue at times for him, and the thing with Parek is I just think that he's probably a guy where, unlike Lev Shunov and Dickinson and even William to me, I think he's a guy that you probably need to match him up with the right defense partner for him to do well.
Hmm.
I think if you stuck him with a guy who's just maybe average defensively, for example, I think that might be a blue line that gets caved in. Similarly to how you saw Quinn Hughes early on when he was playing with guys like Tyler Myers
That's a
before
good
he
point.
fully became Quinn Hughes. People were looking at it like, man, Quinn Hughes is great offensively, but he's a tire fire defensively. But the thing is, I don't even think Quinn Hughes when he was younger was actually that bad defensively. I just think that he's not great, which means that he was probably a little bit below average. But if you stick him with another defenseman who's not that great at defense, that pairing is going to get caved in, right? You can't win a puck battle along the boards. You can't make an exit, right? No one is displacing people in front of the net, and it's just a bad time. So with Parekh is, I think he could be one of the premier offensive defensemen in this league, but the question is he going to be a Tyson Berry or is he going to be a Quinn Hughes? I think there might be growing pains early on in the defensive zone, and he really needs the right defensive partner and the right defensive system, and he needs a coach that'll trust him as a young player to go like, hey, you're going to make mistakes defensively, and even offensively, the game's faster. You might lose the puck, you might get picked off, but I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to trust you, and I'm not going to have give you like a leash that's like as far as I can throw you, which is probably not
Yeah.
that far. If you get stuck on a team where like Keith, like that's my biggest thing with Keith. If a young player makes a mistake, Keith yanks him out the lineup. If you put Parekh in like a situation like that, where you stick him with a guy who's not great defensively and then a coach that doesn't trust young players, I think his confidence and as a result his offense, what makes him special offensively, is gonna be a moot point. But going forward, Bar class of the draft class. He's just so good.
I think a lot of people, including myself, are going to compare him a little bit to Minchikov, who played for the same team and went in the top 10. He's doing really well with Anaheim right now.
Yeah.
And I was a big fan of Minchikov in the draft. I know you weren't so much, but I think the difference with Minchikov and Parekh is Minchikov is a little bit taller. I think he is, anyways. I don't really quite remember. They might be around the same size, but um, the thing that made him really good and what he was able to create space with was his body. Parekh
Mhm.
doesn't use his body as much. He's just a really good skater. Um,
Right.
so maybe that's the thing you can coach him with. Maybe you can coach him to use his body a little bit more, especially in the offensive zone where, yeah, he can fight the pucks, he gets to him quick, but, separate your guy from the play a little bit and good things will happen, right? So then you'll have all the space in the world because he doesn't need much space to make anything happen. So, maybe that could be a thing you can work on as well. But
Yeah.
um, enough about Parekh. Let's move out of the top 10, I think. I don't even know. But Michael Brenzig, Nygaard. The thing with Nygaard, I don't think he's like a particularly kind of like the same thing you said about Cat. I don't think there's a particularly elite thing about him. He's just all around a really responsible player. He's always sort of deflecting passes away, getting in the way of passing lanes. I haven't watched a ton of him. I've watched like little snippets and I've watched some highlights and stuff, but I think I came across a video of a guy breaking him down, but he spoke in French, and I don't speak French at all. So I tried my best. Again, he's further down, defenseman, whatever. But like I said, just really responsible defensively. I think teams are going to value that. I think if you're Detroit, for example, I think that's a team that could take him
Mm.
high. You look at guys like Marco Casper that have gone, and Eiserman loves his off the board picks in the first round. He did it with Sider. That turned out really, really well for the Detroit Red Wings. Like a guy like Caspar, they picked Edvinson, which wasn't particularly off the board at that time, but
Yeah.
um, he's building a team, and when you build a team, you want a responsible defenseman like Nygaard. You want to be able to kind of plug him anywhere. And I think he had a really good World Juniors. That
He did.
for him being on Norway, he was by far their best. I wouldn't say by far. There was a couple of good players. Solberg, I think, who I don't think
Goldberg
was in
was a
other
standout on the
rankings, but
back. Yeah.
he was good. Yeah, and he was, I think, their most productive player. Um, and you were kind of able to see what he was all about offensively. Now, defensively, it's tough to kind of scout a guy like Nygaard when he's playing on a team like Norway. They didn't win a game. I don't think they won. Did they win a game? I don't. Maybe no, they got
No, but
relegated, but no.
yeah, no, but they played well against the
Yeah.
U.S. Uh, with Nygaard, like if there was like a comparable for him, like for me from last year's draft class, like Dalibor Dvorsky,
Oh yeah, that's a
high
good comparison.
floor, responsible defensively. Nygaard, he's fast, he's physical. Every movement he does is made with a purpose. He's got a really strong forechecking game, and like he's just tough on opponents and defensemen who are trying to make breakouts. He gets in on pucks, disrupts breakouts, gets into the body on puck retrievals. He's got a hard shot too, and he's really good in like a cycle game. Like
Mm,
if you start cycling it, and that's what makes him like a perfect like third line slash like second line complementary player. Like you stick him on a line with like Austin Matthews, like oh my gosh, those guys would do wonders on the forecheck.
yeah.
Um, and he really showed me some things, which is why I raised him in my rankings at the World Juniors because Norway had a really good game against the U.S. But he was arguably their best player. He was amazing. He showed some real awareness in building play through transition and using his teammates to find space for himself. It wasn't so great against Chechnya, but he was also Norway's best player for me against Slovakia, and he was everywhere on the ice in their game against Switzerland. And I think on the power play, he's got some value. So, and the big thing for him is everyone's going to look at his stats and be like, this guy's not producing all that much, and it's Sweden's second league, right? But like Dvorsky, I think if he were to go to an OHL team or like another league where, he's probably going to be able to use his size and his tool belt skill set a little bit more, he might be able and like have the opportunity to refine some of his finishing and some of his line driving like he did in the World Juniors with Norway. I think he really could develop into an impactful player who isn't necessarily just a complementary player who can forecheck and win and do well in board battles along in a cycle. I think his transitional ability is going to be something that can be improved with the right development path. And I think the baseline there is already there. He's big, he's strong, he's going to be able to cycle well. He's not going to lose his minutes. That's a third line. That's a third line winger. And I think if that transitional play comes together, he could be a legitimate top six play driver. And that's why he's as high as he is for me.
Hmm. Yeah, pretty much nailed all the points there. We'll move on to number 12, and it's Trevor Connolly, and I'm really happy that Connolly. I've been a Connolly fan since day one in this
You
draft,
have,
and I'm happy that more people are starting to kind of rank him more towards the top half because um, I think he was going to be on the development team. I don't remember exactly. It's been a couple of years, but Connolly is highly skilled. He's a tenacious forward, more tenacious than you'd think. He just always wants that puck on his stick. He always wants to make things happen. He's got a bit of a unique skating style as well, kind of similar to Parek in a way in terms of his four-way mobility. He picks up speed really quickly. He's got some really good vision. He's got really good passing ability. I think I think he's a pure. I wouldn't say pure playmaker in this draft. He does have an underrated shot, and he does get to those areas where he can really let it go. He just chooses to be more of a passer and a first pass sort of winger. And um, offensively, he's gifted. Defensively, I'd say he's a little underrated. I think he's good in
yeah,
some areas, and he's got to work on some areas. But I think his play away from the puck is better than a guy like EISERMAN, for example, who's
yeah,
got some flaws. But so I think that makes him a little more of a complete player. I think they're both somewhat in the same mold. Just Connolly's a bit more of a playmaker. So high energy forward. Really confident with the puck. We kind of watched that in I think it was the Ivan Holinka he played at for the U.S. We kind of saw that confidence with the puck and kind of tapping his stick. Like he wanted the puck really bad. He had a really good Ivan Olinka tournament as well. It might have been
right.
the World Junior Showcase I'm thinking of, but maybe he was good in both. I don't know. But yeah, Connolly is a guy that I think one of those few guys that could be a top six producer in the future. Um, he's had two really good productive years in the USHL. The USHL is kind of a hard league to score in. Um,
Hmm.
so I think him getting the points that he has is really notable. And yeah, he's got a great mind for the game. I've been a fan of him pretty much the entire year. So he might crack top 10. We'll see what happens. But I think as a top 10 player, But
It's just tough with all those blue liners available, man.
100%, yeah. That's and I'm gonna keep going back to that point, but um, yeah, he's
Yeah,
been really
like
good pretty much everywhere.
Connolly is like I said, there's kind of like two molds with the guys after Hellenius, where it's either pretty high floor, strong on the puck, but unless they fix some areas of their game, probably a third line or like complementary second line player, where you need to put them with a real offensive creator. And then on the other hand, you have the offensive creators that probably aren't going to be super strong along the boards and also not like incredible defensively. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's kind of like a story two tales. There's not a lot of guys in between. And I think that's what made a guy like Hellenius so valuable. Connolly is just as dangerous with the puck as anybody in this draft class. Like he kind of reminds he's like Demidov in a sense, but I think his goal scoring ability is not nearly as strong. I think he's got a quick release. I think it's an underrated release when he gets into the right areas. Um, like you mentioned with Eiserman, commitment and attention to detail off the puck definitely could use some work. His motor is pretty inconsistent, so defensive coverage is sometimes not always there. But in transition, I think he's pretty good. He uses that speed to get back and be a back checker. And I think if he continues to grow into his body, because he is like 6'1" or something like that,
yeah,
right? So if he can grow into his body, be a bit stronger on the puck too, I think that's going to be super important with him in terms of his development at the next level. He's got to be able to continue to find himself space by using his body and not just relying on those quick edges and his ability to turn left and right, and change direction. Because at the NHL level, like you can change direction all you want, but once the defenseman gets you close to the boards, it's game over. You know, he's
hmm
gonna pin you there, and you've got to be able to also protect the puck with your body. And I think that if there's one thing I would say on the offensive end, I'd like him to do that more to improve that, and then also just shoot more. I
yeah,
think he opts to pass a little bit too often, and he's a great passer. He's got great vision, but I think by mixing it, it's like that same criticism with Marner. It's like, yes,
yeah.
you're a great passer, um, but shooting more will open up easier passes for you. Like you don't always have to try to make the perfect pass.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. But moving on with the next player, Nikita Artemonov. Um, he was a guy I think Shay mentioned the first time. I didn't really know
Yeah,
much about him. I know he was producing really well in the KHL. He still is. 19 points, 42 games. I don't think he plays a ton. He plays in the same team as Silayev, and I think in the games I've tried to watch them both, it's been Artemonov that's impressed me more than Silayev. He does remind me a lot of Easton Cowan, and again, I've watched a lot of Easton Cowans, but um, in the same mold. He forechecks really hard. He's really tenacious. He wants that puck. Um, I'm trying to find all my notes on Artemonov. There he is. Um, he wants to have the puck on his stick. He attempts to gain possession pretty much any way he can, like Cowan. He's extremely fast. He's uses his stick in a variety of ways. Uses his body. He can use his body. He doesn't use it as much, but he relies on his stick to strip pucks and to gain possession. He knows when to stay in possession as well. Um, and like I said, he's putting up great numbers as an underage KHLer. I think it's a late birthday, but
yeah.
and
Oh, five.
kind of like Silayev, just kind of came out of nowhere, I would say. And more people are kind of starting to notice what he can bring, both offensively and defensively. Kind of similar mold, I'd say, to Nygaard. I just wouldn't say Nygaard is as I wouldn't say he's as tenacious. He's not as he's kind of like a spark plug, Artemonov, and I think teams are going to value that. I mean, look at Cowan. I mean, I would say he came from generally nowhere. I mean, I knew him, but
Right. Yeah.
in terms of,
General
in the
draft
scouting world,
consensus.
general draft consensus, exactly. He just kind of came from nowhere. I mean, and look where he is now. I think Artemonov can sort of have that same trajectory, especially if he plays well again in the KHL and just keeps on potting away points at the men's league. So,
Yeah, I mean his tools are like I think underrated. He like the
Hmm.
motor is what everyone's gonna talk about, but I've seen moments where he's not afraid to take guys one on one, and he's exercised kind of trying these high skill plays against some of these KHL defensemen. But he picks and chooses when to try those very well. Like he doesn't do it where it could risk a turnover or just killing a play. Um, but again, the reason why he's in this second tier and under Hellenius is because they're only flashes. And I think Hellenius's offensive ceiling is a bit higher. I'm not sure Artemonov is going to be ever a real play driver on the line. I do think he's going to be a complementary player, but I do see him favorably as a complementary player in the top six. I think of a guy like Zach Hyman with probably a little bit better vision and passing. He's got that motor. He's developed the puck skills. He can kind of work on your first, second, or third line as long as you play him with other good players that will be more dominant on the puck. Um, and his skating could use a bit of refinement. Like I don't think he's a special skater, but Zach Hyman's not a special skater, and he makes it work by being effective in front of the net, being effective along the boards, and winning puck battles, right, and on the forecheck. So I think he's a good player. He's been productive in the men's league. And the fact that he's been able to stay there all season is a testament to him. Although to be fair, Torpedo does play young guys more than most other KHL teams.
Yeah.
Um, but the fact he's been able to stick in the lineup and get consistent minutes and produce, there's gotta be value in that. And I think he's my eighth ranked forward. So he's pretty up there
Yeah, I could definitely see a team, maybe in like the late teens or so. Realistically, I mean, there's always going to be players that go off the board, but I think if a team takes them on that level, they're going to be pretty happy with what they get and what's on the table. Um,
for sure.
we'll move on to the next player here. It's Carter Yakimchuk. I'm trying to see what you have him ranked 12th, 16th. All right, so fairly similar, kind of in the mid to first round there. He's the point man for Calgary's power play unit. I'm trying to how many does he have here points wise? He's got 20 goals now, so 20 goals, 47 points. He's a point a game. Almost about the same amount of goals as PAREKH. So that kind of tells you the first thing right there. He's got a hard shot. He loves to shoot the puck. Um, he skates and controls and moves the puck really well for a bigger D man, I'd say. Sort of similar to Dickinson, sort of similar to the guy like Levchinov. He's not really a defender that wows you that much either.
No,
He's a decent skater, decent straight line skater, but he's just so big. He's not so agile quite yet. I mean, maybe he could be agile in the future, but right now, what you see is kind of what you get in terms of the skill and the speed of Yakimchuk. I think he's a safe defender in this draft. I do think he gets a little overzealous. I do think he turns the puck over probably a little more than you'd want from a D man. He does remind me a lot of Logan Mailloux at the same age, and Mailloux, barring all controversies, was a first round talent in his draft. I think he's got maybe number 3 defenseman potential, number 4 defenseman potential, so he's not quite, as high as I had him before, but he's a bit of a safe pick, I'd say. I'd like to see him use his body a lot more. He's got a big body, just doesn't really use it very much, especially in his own end. I don't think he really uses it much for body positioning. If there's a guy in front of him, he'll just kind of like stand in front of him. Doesn't really do much. Doesn't do much to kind of irk him. Um, doesn't use his stick much. Doesn't use his body much. Doesn't really fight for position that way. His transition game's fine, and he's able when he skates up. He'll make some dashes up to make a play, but he'll skate right back. He's got no problem doing it. He can skate all day long. He's just not a super elite skater, and I don't think he's got an elite um, quality about him. And there's things I think he has to work on in his own end. But I think offensively he's great. I think he could be a high end player in the WHL, and we'll see with him. I think the development curve is going to be a little bit longer with a guy like Yakimchuk, but I think all around he could end up being a pretty serviceable player one day. I just think it's going to take a little bit of time, but
I think I'm higher on him than he is because he's actually my number 4 D man and Parekh's my number 5. So I actually have him above Parekh, which I know, hot take. But for me, it's just he's got the size and his skating is nothing special, but I think he's got really good instincts as a defenseman. And for a hitman team over in Calgary that doesn't really generate a ton of offense, 19 goals is like 20 goals or 19 goals, however many he has, like that's pretty impressive, you know?
Hmm.
And the thing with him is that he doesn't use his body a ton defensively, I agree, but in the offensive zone, he really uses that size to protect the puck really well and buy himself time and opportunity to make a decision in the offensive zone. And he's got some ability to take guys one on one. Like I've seen him take the puck along the boards and just drive it to the net for a goal. Like there's not for me, it's just there's not a lot of defensemen that I can see that can do that, right? There's a lot of guys like PAREKH who's just super dynamic, shifting in and out of defensemen, finding space for himself, wiring shots in. But like Yakimchuk's a guy who can legitimately like drive the puck to the net as a defenseman, right? And so
Hmm.
he does take some risks there when he does that, where he jumps into the play. But I really think that with some refinement with his skating, he could really become a dynamic offensive player. I think his passing could also use some work. Don't get me wrong, but when he has to make simple decisions on whether to hold it or pass it, he generally makes the right decision. He just doesn't have the elite passing vision that a guy like PAREKH or William or even Dickinson and Levshunov have, right? But he's got those he's very confident with the puck and he reads the play pretty well. I think defensively, you're right. He's not great. He doesn't engage as much as I think I would like him to. I don't think he makes life overly difficult for some players in his own zone, along the boards, in front of the net. Um, but I do think being 6'3" helps that. And I think that's something you can teach him to him. He's already 194. He's 6'2", 6'3". Like he's a big boy. He's a big guy. I think if you work on his skating and you kind of tell him like, hey, like body you guys a little bit more, I think he could be a really good defenseman. I could totally see him as a number two on the blue line. Like you pair him with like a superstar defenseman, and he could play top pairing minutes for you. Um, I think at his worst, he could be a guy like Jake McCabe, where he's got some offensive abilities, but and he's not amazing defensively, but he's big and he can throw a hit. So if Yakimchuk grows into that, then that's just a second pair defenseman, like you mentioned. But I think his floor is a second pair guy, and I think his ceiling is a really solid number two on the blue line.
Yeah, he makes some solid points there for sure. For me, it's hard to kind of read Yakimchuk sometimes, especially in the D zone, because it doesn't do much. But
Yeah,
you'd like to see that for a guy of his size, and I think that's why I kind of give a little bit of slack to a guy like PAREKH, who's not really known for that.
he's not as
As
big too, right?
No, he's not as big, and you kind of want to see that more from a guy like Yakimchuk, who has that size and can use it. He just kind of chooses not to. But
Not
like you
to.
said, he can. It can. You can teach him that. That's not a very hard thing to get a habit of. But um, we'll move on here with Henry Muse, and same thing with Connolly. And for me, as I've been a pretty big fan of Muse since the draft season kind of started. Muse had a really good rookie year last year in Ottawa, and he's kind of continuing that trajectory this year. He's one of those players that isn't flashy, isn't doesn't have really like a huge wow factor, if you want to call it that. And I don't think he was ranked in the first round at all in Bob McKenzie's rankings, and he's been kind of in like the
Mm,
20s or 30s. But I think personally, if you are building a team and you need a responsible defenseman that isn't flashy, doesn't take risks, really good in his own zone, really good transition game, and has a really good offensive game, pretty much all around. You want a guy like Henry Muse. He's an unbelievable skater as well. Not like PAREKH unbelievable, where he just like like I said, not like flash or dash or anything, but he picks up speed really quickly. He walks the line pretty well. He finds open areas really well and really quickly. Um, and he's able to carry that blue line for Ottawa this year, who I don't think is a great team either in the OHL. Those standings are constantly changing, especially this year. But um, with Muse, it's just there's some things I can say. It's kind of similar to Dickinson and why I have him as the top ranked D man. There's things, a lot of good things you can say about him, but it's kind of hard to find something wrong with Muse's game. like I said, if there's anything, it's just that he's not flashy. You don't maybe notice him all the time, but he gets the job done. He's a coach's player, and I think teams should value that a little bit more than just picking the guy who's going to get the fans off their seat. Muse is not that player, but he's a guy that's going to help you win games, and he can be on a really good team one day. And analytically as well, I think he'll be a solid player in the back end in the future.
Yeah, I think the thing with him is that, for me at least, his he he's a guy who's athletic. And I think with his athleticism, he's got an NHL shot, right? He's got NHL skill. He's got pretty great skating, right? As a right hand shot, and he kind of is able to take pressure, relieve pressure, and then find an open pass to the slot where there's a forward, right? Those are all parts of his game that I really like. But I think for him this season, at least, I don't know because I haven't really watched him previous to his draft year this year, but there have been at times where I think he's questioning his reads, and he does get beat one on one sometimes. Um, so and he makes, I think a lot of it is he's not really trusting his instincts right now, and he's misreading some plays, and he gets caught out of position for it. And which leads to a little bit of a fire drill in his zone sometimes. And with a guy who's as athletic and as great of a skater as he is, you probably don't expect that to happen as often as it kind of has this year. But I do think that um, he's a really good player. I think all the traits are there. And I think when you're drafting at this point in the draft with defensemen, I think you're either drafting on traits or safety. Like you either want a guy who you
Mm-hmm.
can reasonably project to be a top four guy, or you're looking for a guy who might be a top four guy, but if things go right, could be like a really, really good number three, like a really good number three. And finding a really good number three defenseman, especially as a right hand shot, is tough to find in this league. And I think if everything goes right with Muse and he kind of gets out of his head a little bit and trusts and really trusts his instincts, that he's probably going to be a guy who jumps up my board a bit. But he just looks a little bit tentative and makes the wrong read sometimes because of that, and it just it looks a little bit shaky. But I like him as a player, and I think he does have top four upside, and that's why I've got him as I think my number seven defenseman, which is
Mm-hmm.
pretty good in a draft class as deep as this one.
Yeah. All right, we'll move along here. Another OHLer, CHLer. It's a good year for North America as well. There's not like a ton of Europeans, especially Sweden's kind of having a bit of a down year this year. But
Yeah.
Liam Greentree, and I said this the first time we kind of spoke about these prospects, is Greentree is probably the bright spot on a really bad Windsor team. Um, does a lot of things right. He's strong. He's a pretty good skater, not like anything crazy, but he's a good skater. He's got a wide range of offensive tools, though. He can beat guys. He can strip pucks away. He can forecheck really well. He gets to the right areas quite often as well. There are games where he's a little bit quiet. I think he's for a guy that has 64 points in 41 games on a bad team and a plus 25. You wouldn't expect him to be inconsistent, but there are times where he does have some quiet nights. So he kind of leaves you a little bit more to desire. He does remind me a little bit of Wyatt Johnson. Wyatt Johnson was a guy. He's not as big as Johnson, I don't think. Anyway, he might be actually 6'2". Anyways, but Johnson was a guy that didn't play any games in his draft year, and then had a ridiculously good year with Windsor. Now Windsor was a really good team at that point, so if they get some more guys in, maybe he'll be a good player next year for Windsor. Maybe they do a lot better, um, especially if they have a high draft pick because guys like Wasselin and Valentini are going to make that team probably a lot better than what it already is. Um, but with Green Tree, he's a good finisher, he's a good playmaker, and that's something you kind of want to watch for as well. Guys like Catton, who I mentioned, guys that can kind of put the team on his back a little bit, make players around him better. That's something that Green Tree does really well as well. Um, Maybe doesn't have as high as a ceiling as Wyatt Johnson, but that's just kind of a guy that who he reminds me of in terms of how offensively creative he is. on such a bad team, right? So
Right.
um, I think it's highly notable for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Greentree is just a guy where I think he's big, he's strong, he's got a real strong shot, and I think he uses that size pretty well on the back check with stick checking opponents. And I think he's a pretty high motor player, to be honest.
Mhm.
So as a result, but the thing is, it's just that ceiling. It comes back to that ceiling, and I don't think he's gonna be anything more than probably a second line player at best. Um, and he kind of is bunched into that tier with Artemonov and Brandsteg Nygaard for me, where, you know, I think you mentioned his playmaking. I think his playmaking vision could still use a bit of work. I think he does a great job of putting himself in positions where he can be a passing option for his teammates. Like he finds open space really well, but I think as a passer himself could use some work. And for me, he's not a super dynamic player. I think he's more opportunistic than dynamic, if that makes sense. Because like I think those are opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Dynamic means like you are creating every opportunity and like with the puck on your stick and you're dominating these chances. Whereas opportunistic is you do a lot of really good things that leads to higher probability of you being able to score, and you're opportunistic and you take advantage of those opportunities that your good play kind of creates and you're able to put the puck in the net, right? Like I think it's less so like him individually just carrying the team per se. I think a lot of it is he does a lot of good things and makes things easy for his teammates, and he's got a really good shot. And I think his skating is something that probably could use a little bit of work. I don't think he's like an incredible skater, which is probably why he's not like a true play driver on his line for me. Um, and we've seen guys like Connor Geeky flourish despite me having concerns about their skating. But I think you agree with me on this. I think Geeky's toolbox of skills is much more diverse and broad
Especially
than
for a big guy.
Greentree's is. But
Especially
he's a
for a
really
bigger
good player.
player.
I like him a lot. He's been super productive on a bad team. And he's my 10th ranked forward. So, he's gonna go in the first round. And, I think he's a middle six guy. And I think the team would be happy with that at pick what, 16?
Yeah, that's not bad. Middle six isn't a bad player. It's not.
Yeah.
All right. So,
17. Oh
oh
boy.
dear. All right. So, this is where everyone dislikes it because everyone has him a lot higher than we do. But
Yeah.
um, Anton Saleyev. Um, he's a player that came out of nowhere. Let's start with the good things. He's 6'7". He plays a lot in the KHL. Um, he does skate a lot better. He does things a lot better than you would expect from a 6'7" defenseman. He skates a lot better than you would think. Mobility isn't the greatest because he's obviously 6'7", but um, he's relatively quick. Um, he's got such a rare package. Um, I wouldn't say he's great under pressure. Um, I think when he does get forechecked a little bit, he does tend to. I wouldn't say panic is the right word, but he makes quick decisions that aren't always the right decisions. Most of the time they are, but there's been times where he does get kind of caught out in his own zone. Um, One thing I like about him defensively as well is that he does use his body. He does finish checks. Um, I just think the thing with him being ranked so high is you have him ranked high because you like the package and you like what he could potentially bring to a team. There aren't
You're
really any six
projecting
foot
his
seven
tools
defensemen.
into
You're
actual
projecting his
performance.
tools, 100%, and you like what he could bring. Um, and I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of Silayev. I think he's got more things to work on than I think other teams are prepared for and other people are prepared for. Um, it's just been such a hard read on Silayev. This is really like his breakout year. I think he really first made waves when, well, start of the year, I was already playing top minutes. And this is you mentioned, the team that loves to play younger players a lot more minutes. Like Artemonov plays in the same team and he's playing a ton of minutes.
Yeah.
Um, he's just such a hard read because this is really his first productive year. Like last year, he's got a decent shot as well for such a big guy. Hard shot. You could maybe play on power play, maybe play PK. I think I think a lot of people are comparing him to Chara a little bit, and I don't think he's going to be as in with Chara. Chara was pretty dominant for such a big defenseman, but we'll see with him. I'm really unsure about Salev, and and I hope I'm wrong because um, I don't even really know why. I just hope I'm wrong. To be honest with you,
Because you
I
don't
hope
want to
we.
root against a guy, right?
You
Just
don't
so
want
you
to
can
root
be
against
right.
him. Yeah, it's just he's just a tough read for me. I don't feel comfortable really putting him in the top half of the draft. I mean, Paul McKenzie has him at number 2, and that's just it's so wild to me. You know what I mean? It's
He doesn't have that body of work, you know?
no.
He's and the thing with Salaev is like you're really drafting him in order to be a top guy in your draft. Like you're drafting him because you think that he's 6'7", he skates really fast, and he's a guy that could be a number one defenseman and dominate on both sides of the ice. But the thing is, like, you could also come out with Nikita Zadorov, you
Hmm.
know, a 6'6" guy who's like, and like that's the thing, like that's like the thing with Saleev. He's like his bottom line, I think, is like a guy like Nikita Zadorov, and his high end is maybe a guy like Chara, right? But like realistically, what's more likely? You know, like I
Yeah.
get it. He's 6'7", he skates really well, he can hit, and because of his size, he does well in terms of stripping pucks and kind of closing gaps and he's got an active stick, right? And he's been used in all facets this year on his team. He's played some power play. He's killed some penalties. He's got an accurate shot that is only going to get stronger when he gets stronger and older himself. And he hits. I think he leads the team in hits right now.
Hmm.
As a 17-year-old. So
Yeah.
there's like I get it. There's a lot to like, but I think he gets a little bit skittish sometimes with the puck on his stick. He rushes his processing. Um, and I think that there's there's no guarantee that he's gonna be a char. He doesn't have the body of work. Like Sam Dickinson, you look at him and you go, that's an NHL top four defenseman if everything goes wrong.
Hmm.
Like that's a top four defenseman. With Saleyev, like it's a guy you go, is he gonna go chasing the big hit too often, right? Is he gonna be strong with the puck on his with the puck on his stick? Does he have the processing ability to make the right play every time? We don't know that yet. He's had one season, and even in that one season, he's been a bit skittish with that decision making, right? He see player, he try to make past the player, right? It's very
Hmm.
direct. I don't think he enjoys having the puck on his stick for too long, and that's not a great trait for your number one guy, right? With a guy
Yeah.
his size, I want to see him do more of what a guy like Yakimchuk does. Use that frame, hold off a forechecker, buy yourself time and space, and then make the right pass. With Saleyev, sometimes when he has the puck, it's like he can't wait to get rid of it. And that's not something that projects super well in the NHL, where a lot of teams are great at forechecking. Like that's the
Hmm.
cream of the crop.
I feel like his trajectory as well in terms of his draft performance and draft rankings. I remember a few years ago people were hyping up Muka Madulin, and I was a guy that was not a fan of Muka Madulin. There were a lot of people, especially on Twitter, that hated him in the first round. They couldn't stand it. And I wouldn't say Silev reminds me of him because Muka Madulin was just such a weird defenseman.
Right.
But like Silev is also just kind of a weird defenseman, and like you get guys that are ranking him high because of what he could be, and like we mentioned, I mean, 6'7". I mean, what's there not to like if he does pan out? But people like us, we kind of look at what he is already, and right now, I think he's a mid first round guy. I think he's a first round player. I
Yeah.
just don't think he's a top 10 guy. Not right now for me. Um,
He's still very raw.
he is. He's raw, and I think that's my biggest issue is that like I just am very unsure about him because of the fact that he's just kind of an out of nowhere player that like people are jumping on the bandwagon for. And I'm kind of one of those party poopers that are like, hey, hold on a second here. Let's like actually break this down and see what kind of player he is before we get too ahead of ourselves. But yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about with Celia. People probably already hate us for this, so we're just going to move
Yeah,
on.
probably a dislike ratio about to go crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Igor Chernyshov and Tija Ginla we have tied here. And I'll say about Chernyshov is that he kind of screams middle six for me. There's not like he's
Yeah.
not like super dominant, but he's not bad either. He's having a pretty decent year in the MHL. And again, like I mentioned, the MHL is just kind of a funny league. He was playing in the KHL. I don't know if Moskva's a very good team in the KHL. He might still be playing in the KHL. I have no idea.
I think he's in the MHL now,
Yeah,
but
Elite
he
Prospect says
definitely
he's in the
started the year in the
MHL.
KHL.
Yeah, so at least he has that experience. He played 5 games last year as a 16-year-old, so that's quite notable as well. I think he's a guy that you could kind of project as a power forward um, at the next level, but I don't think he has anything that's super notable about his game. He's just all around. He's an okay player. I think he's a safe bet, but I think there are things that he should work on as well. He's just kind of a tough player to read, but I'd say a definition of middle of the first round would be Chernyshov. Just like nothing great, but nothing bad either. Just a very um,
He's Yeah, he's a power forward who can skate pretty well.
mhm.
And he's got a bit of a rough and tumble style of play, right? He
Yep.
forechecks. He's got a strong work rate, kind of similar to Brandsteg Nygaard and those guys and Artemonov and those guys above him. But he doesn't bring any real potential of play driving to me. Like,
Mhm.
he's certainly pretty physical, but I think that's why he's been able to get KHL games this early into his career, because he kind of they don't play their rookies usually a ton in the KHL, and because he's physical and he skates well and he forechecks well, like that's a pretty good, you know, recipe to get bottom 6 minutes in the KHL, right?
Mhm.
But the play driving toolkit isn't there yet, like,
He
and
tries.
he hasn't really produced at the KHL level the way a guy like Artemonov has.
Mhm.
Um, and so you question, like where is he going to get the offensive production from? That's the main question for him. Um, and so as a result, he's just a middle six guy. Like he's a guy like Pierre
Mhm.
Engvall. Like he just win. He doesn't lose his minutes, but he probably won't win his minutes. Although recently Engvall has been on the very hated end of Isles Twitter, so maybe he's not the best example.
Right.
But he's like an Alex Kerfoot, like these guys that like they play in the middle six, they don't win their minutes, they don't lose their minutes, but they'll hit a couple of guys, and he can probably play some penalty kill, and he'll forecheck, and he can probably get some extended pressure in the zone through that forechecking, but he's just not anything special offensively.
Yeah. I think he's Klim Kostin with a little bit more upside. He does remind me a little bit of Kostin. He
Mm,
tries to create offense. Like he'll cut in the inside every once again, and he has projectable things about him. But like you mentioned, he's just kind of I think he'll be like a middle six guy. And I think you'll be happy with that at this stage. Kind of like a guy like Green Tree. You're just kind of you're happy with that. He's got a high work rate. He can kill penalties. He can be a bit of a pesky player to play against, and you want to be tough to play against. So
I mean,
um,
teams trade first round picks for those kinds of guys at the deadline.
absolutely. Um, but with TJ Ginla, I had him pretty. I'd say I was a little bit harsh on Ginla. Offensively, um, he's really good one on one. He's got a high end skill set. He tries a final stick handle, tries to get past defenders that way, and that's again kind of a trend you see with a lot of these WHL players this year. Maybe just in general, that's just how it works. I don't know, but
Maybe
um,
that's just how the WHL plays. Eh?
yeah, he finds open areas on the ice really well, but kind of the same thing with Yakimchuk, and I don't see him use his body as much to create turnovers or to find space or anything like that. He's able to kind of sneak around and find space that way, but he doesn't really use his body. And I think again, he's not as big as Yakimchuk, but your father's Jerome McGinley, who was one of the best power forwards ever, and you know what I mean. So it's just one of those
Yeah,
things. Maybe it's just like more desire just because of nostalgia, but maybe it's just not that type of player. But he does prefer to use his long reach to retrieve pucks as opposed to his body. It'd be nice for him to use his body a little bit more, but if he's not going to use his body, I mean, it is what it is type thing. But um, I think his skating needs a little bit of work though. I'm not huge on
I
it. Like
agree.
he's not
Yeah.
super agile. He's he can be quick, straight line, but I think there's times where he'll forecheck and he'll kind of stumble over himself, or he'll try to cut in the inside a little bit too fine and loses the puck, or just kind of gets closed out. So I think that's a big thing to work on. It kind of reminds me of Nick Merkley a little bit. Nick Merkley was a first round pick, and he had to work on his skating and never quite did, and he never really quite made it. I don't think again was just gonna be a bust. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's a little bit of trends that are there that I've seen with other players in the past that haven't really panned out quite as well. It's a thing you can work on, obviously, if he works at it hard enough. The shot is fantastic. He scored a ton of goals. I think he
Yeah.
had He's athletic, he's strong, for like a 6 foot guy, and that's why I think I would like to, see him use his body a little bit more. But um, yeah, I think he's definitely. I like him better than I did at the start and like at, let's say, New Year's time. But I think he's
Probably
gonna play.
still not a top six guy.
Probably not. I think you're right. I like his brother more. I like Joe
Yeah, yeah,
quite a
yeah.
bit. He's dynamic.
Joe's pretty dynamic.
He's dynamic, good play driver. We'll talk about him in a couple years, I'm sure. But um, Tej is not that type of player, but he could be kind of in the same mold as Chernyshov potentially. It could be just a pesky player to play against. Well, we'll see. We'll see with, again, like, he could also just be a power play unit. So we'll see. We'll see. But there's
I
development that
think
needs to be
Tidge
there.
is not as physical as Chernyshov is. But I think he likes the puck on his stick. So like there is some play driving to his game. Like he's strong on the puck. He's got good habits, if that makes sense. Like he's always looking around the ice, scanning. He's strong on his stick, which he uses more than his body. But on the forecheck, on the back check, he uses his stick really well. He's got a lightning quick release, and that's how he's been able to pile up so many goals in the WHL. And so from that aspect, like I don't think there's as much of a bust kind of label to be put on him because he does do a lot of the little things right. I don't think he's super dynamic. And in a draft class with so many dynamic players, especially from the WHL, like that kind of puts a cap on what his ceiling is. Probably like a third line complimentary guy.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, he doesn't like outside his shot, like, and he doesn't even like his shot's not the best in the draft, right? Like, it's not super dynamic, and there's not anything that's super eye popping. And one thing that I just hate is how he always goes for these controlled entries, like no matter what. Like he just loves controlled entries, but he's not nearly shifty enough nor strong enough to be able to make that pay off all the time. And a lot of the times he's going to lose the puck at the blue line. And so, you know, other than that, his hockey IQ is pretty good. He works hard. Screams third line winger to me. Screams third
Yeah,
line winger to me.
100%.
Now we
And
have Emil Hemming, who's a guy I think you had ranked in our last mock
yeah,
draft in
and
the top
I had him
16.
ranked pretty high, I think. But I will say I think his production's been up a little bit. He was at the World Juniors. I don't think he was particularly great at the World Juniors. I don't think he played a ton either, though. Um, I'll say this about Hemming. I think he's more complete than a guy like Chernyshov or again. Well, this is kind of the stage of the draft where you're just kind of splitting hairs
Yeah,
between like 19, 20, 21. So like they're a similar player in that regard. I think he's another potentially middle six player. Just a real complete player. He looks to be more of a pure shooter. He's got 7 goals. He had 10 and 10 games to start the year at the U20. Um, so he seems to have a pretty hard shot and pretty accurate one at that. So, um, but he just seems to read defensively. What's the defensive structures really well. He seems to read passing lanes
yeah,
really well. Um, so I think as a two-way guy, I think you're banking on him more. He could go above Chernyshov and again just for that reason. Maybe even a guy like Greentree. If you like those responsible players enough, kind of like Brandzeg Nygaard, kind of like Aramonov, then you take a guy like Hemming because of his responsibility. I don't think he's like kind of like in the same mold as Muse. I don't think he's flashy. I don't think I don't think he's a great play driver, but I think he does enough, and he's just got a hard shot as well. So maybe plug in power play, maybe plug in penalty kill, for the future. But he's got decent size as well, so I'm sure whatever team picks him will find a way with him. I think he'll find a way to make it somehow. I think he's a safe bet,
yeah.
but yeah, that's about it really.
I agree. I mean, he's playing third line for TPS right now in
Okay.
Liga, right? He's already playing top 9 minutes in the men's league. I think he fits really well into like his team's defensive scheme. He does really well on the forecheck, and he does it with a purpose, right? He funnels the defenseman into the team's coverage, and he's got an eye for open space and being in the right place at the right time, right? Like I clown on Chris Kreider all the time for tap in goals, right?
Yeah.
But there is an art to finding open areas of the ice where you're always available to put in like to score, right? Like
Mhm.
that's a hidden talent, and I think that's something that Hemming is also great at, just finding areas of the ice where he doesn't get picked up and he's able to bang in rebounds or get a receive a pass and have a clean lane to shoot through. Um, I think he's strong. He forechecks hard. He works hard, like kind of like Artemonov, Greenshee, Chernishev, like
Yep.
as you've mentioned. But and he's got a nice shot too. There was that shot against Czechia at the Helinka Gretzky, right? Like he just wired
Mhm.
that top corner against Chechnya on the power play. The big thing for me is he's not a play driver for me. Like like especially in all my viewings, he looks very. He's not on the puck very often. And as a
Yeah.
result, he doesn't seem like a. I think he's a read and react player. He reads what's happening on the ice and he puts himself in a spot where he can get the puck in an opportunistic spot and then just put it on net. Right? There's not a whole lot of like. There's not a whole lot of complexity to his game. I think he plays a very straightforward, very smart game, and I think it limits his ceiling. But I think he's a perfect third liner too. Um, but I think he's probably more safe of a bet to be on the third line than Tijigin. But I just like Iginla a bit more right now because at least Iginla is showing some of his tools with the puck on his stick. But
Mhm.
Hemming's a good player.
He is. All
Moving
right. This is
on,
where
we've
things
got
get a little
four
interesting.
guys.
Yeah. So I guess they're all tied, but you're big on Basha and Bison, and I'll probably let you take the floor for those two guys, but I'll take Kivaharia and Bolver.
Okay, yeah, we'll just do the kind of two for like two. I'll do
Yeah.
Blobber
Yeah.
and Bison, and then you can and Basha, and then you can do Kiwi Haru and Boisvert.
Yeah. Sure.
Um, yeah, Bison is just I think super steady. He's playing in the men's league already. He played I think for Cuckoo in the playoffs last year. He's super reliable. I think he's a great four directional skater. I think he's great on exits. He's he's kind of like my guy. Like every year, I kind of have like a guy that
Yeah.
I'm pretty bullish on that most draft analysts don't have like touching the first round. Like it was Cali Odelius a couple of years ago, Hunter Brzus, I still can't say his name,
Burstevich.
Brustevich,
Yeah. Yeah. I
last
was big on him
year.
too.
Um,
Yeah.
he was my guy. Topin Niemela was a guy that I really liked, and Bison reminds me of Niemela a lot. I think he's got really good hockey IQ. I think both of them are not super strong on the puck, which is probably why um, most scouts don't have him that high. Because as a defenseman, you kind of need to be like stable with the puck for breakouts. But I think that's something that you can build like as you grow into your body. If that makes sense, he's six
Yeah.
feet. He's only 163 pounds. He builds, and the fact that he's despite those deficiencies, he can still log consistent minutes in a men's league. Is pretty impressive to me. He did make Finland's World Junior team, but he was a reserve, so he didn't
Okay.
actually end up playing, which was quite disappointing because I was very excited to see him. Um, and he's got some untapped. I think he has the potential to be like Topi Niemela, where draft year he was touted for his hockey IQ, for his skating, and his like maturity as a player as young as he is. And then the next season, the offense really comes through. I can really see that happening for a guy like Väisänen. And I think he's a pretty safe bet to be a number five at the NHL level and maybe a number four. And I think that's pretty good for the tail end of the first round.
Mhm.
With Basha, he's a guy that I think is overlooked because of the team that he plays on with so many like amazing players. You got Lindstrom, you got McKenna on that team. Like it is just a crazy team. And he's fast. Like he plays fast. He plays with a rapid pace. And while guys like Hemming and Chernyshov, I feel come off as predictable. They're like a very hard forechecking guy. Basha is a guy who's kind of more similar to Connolly. He has a lot of tools and he uses them almost recklessly. He's great with the puck on his stick. He's great at entries. He finds different ways to get into the zone with the puck on his stick. He has really great skating and edge work that allows him to move left and right. And just he really did he like his finger is really on the pulse of a lot of what happens on that line. Um, and he's been really one of my favorite players to watch this year, and someone that really I wish I could put higher. But again, with him, consistency is an issue. Sometimes he can take over games as a primary play driver and just find impossible passes. And sometimes he's just comfortable with being on the outside and just trying to pick passes here and there. Um, and he's not super strong on the puck, which, like for example, in Easton Cowan, like he can get pushed off the puck sometimes because he's not like super big, um, and he doesn't shoot enough. And until he uses his shot to create opportunities for himself and his teammates as a passer, he might end up falling victim to being kind of one dimensional, kind of like a Jeremy Bracco. And he's also an 05, so he's an older
Mhm.
prospect, which means that he's not going to get as much of a benefit of the doubt as someone as an 06. But I think he's shown enough over this season for me to have him as a first round pick.
Yeah, fair enough. I think Vicenen I did it at 64. I only posted 32, but I did 64. He was 34, so he wasn't like too far off the first round. He does seem like a pretty stable defenseman, mobile defenseman, so I could see why you like him. I'll start with Kivaharyu, and I am rooting for Kivaharyu. I think out of anybody in this draft, I am rooting for Kivaharyu because we know how good he can be. We know what his talent is. You have him as 5'9". I think he's listed as 5'10". Doesn't really make too much of a difference, but anyways, um, he's always played up, and he's always played really well. He's always played um, above his age group, and he hasn't been really out of place. You've always kind of noticed him. He always had that flash and that offensive ability. He is a really good play driver as a blue liner. In this draft, it's been rough because he's been injured. He's played in the men's league quite a bit already. Um, Going back to last year, he played 21 games as a 16-year-old. So clearly the talent's there with Kivaharyu. He's stronger than you would maybe think for a guy that's 5'10" as well. Um, he's just been injured, and I look at a guy like Ratu a couple years ago. I don't know if I can't remember if he was injured or whatever, but just a guy that kind of kept falling and falling and falling. And I think a team's going to be happy with getting Kivaharyu on their team. I feel the same with Kivaharyu that I do about Adam Yurachek. I think Yurachek also had a really tough draft year, and it's kind of tough to get a read on him. But I just don't think he's really had a great year to begin with, anyways. But um, I hope Kivaharyu comes back after this injury, and it was quite a they kept him out for quite a bit as well. He's not expected back still for another couple of weeks or so, but I hope he hits the ground running because he definitely has the talent to do that. With Boisvert, he's a guy that I had him outside my 32 last month, but I've watched him a bit more, and I could definitely see a team picking him in the first round. He's very fast. I think he's probably one of the fastest players in this draft, and he's a pure shooter um, as well. He's got 21 goals already. Um, I think offensively, he's got some decent vision there as well, but I think you're getting him to be a shooter, to be a power play guy, to kind of stand in the middle there as well. He's 6'2". He's a bigger player. Um, and he's producing pretty well in the USHL. He did last year, but it was more, from a playmaking standpoint. Now that he's kind of showing off his shot a little bit more, we can kind of see what he can bring at both ends of the ice and playmaking and goal scoring. So he's a player that I think is going to go later in the first round, potentially second round, and I think a team is going to love that. Um, he's going to be playing with the University of North Dakota as well, which is a pretty underrated program. A lot of players have come out of that program. So um, yeah, I have him late in the first round now, as opposed to where I had him about a month ago. But yeah, I think he's a real strong contender there.
Yeah, no. I think Boisvert I also had around the same range as you. So
Yeah,
um, he's playing well in the USHL, and I think he's producing. And you mentioned earlier, it's tough to produce consistently. Um,
yeah,
in the USHL. And the last player that we're gonna do like an actual assessment of is gonna be Thomas Lavoie, and this is a guy that I have fallen in love with recently. Um, he plays for Cape Breton in the QMJHL. Not a ton of QMJHL guys right now in this first round for us. But he's a guy I'm very bullish on. I think he was a former first overall pick in the QMJHL draft. He's got NHL size. The guy's 6'4", 225 at 17 years
Yeah, he's
old.
big.
Um, he's and because of his size, he's really been played as a shutdown defenseman in a very offensive league. And I think he's done a pretty good job. He's calm, he's poised with the puck. Because of his size, he uses it well in board battles and makes life really difficult for guys on other teams. He's got a very fluid skater too at his size, and that skating ability allows him to defend entries and rushes well. His gap control is pretty good, and his size gives him options, right? He can either A, give himself a bit of a cushion, and just poke pucks away with that long reach, or B, he can guide defenders into the boards with his size and neutralize those rush opportunities. And he does make mistakes, and that's why he's probably not super high on everybody's boards. But he's a great skater, and more often than not, he really uses that skating to recover. He's got soft hands for a defenseman, which is pretty rare in my opinion, and he's got a really strong slap shot. He's a guy who's also played power play minutes for Cape Breton. Um, he's not a super great passer in terms of his vision. He's got a nice first pass that jumpstarts the team in transition, but he's not really going to be someone who's going to be able to handle the puck and feather a pass across the screen the way that a guy like Zeev Boyum can. Like, that's not his game. He makes relatively simple passes, but I just think he's got so many things going for him, from his size to his skating to his deployment. And I think if he can find a way to bring up his offensive production, and really use that toolkit that he has and start getting results from it, this is a guy who can really jump up into like the mid first round for me. And that's saying a lot given how deep this draft class is at defense. And he's a right hand shot.
Yep.
This is a guy I would love if the Leafs could get him. I think he would fit really, really well. Unfortunately, he's not an August birthday, so he's not a
Hmm.
summer birthday. So the Leafs, they always like drafting the guys with June and July birthdays. So this is probably not going to happen. But
Yeah, I think
I
Laval is a. Well, I think Laval would be a good fit for the Leafs just because they have so much skill and it kind of overpowers them sometimes to the point where they kind of need defensive players pretty much every year. But
yeah
I'll say this about Laval: I haven't watched too much of him. He did go first overall in the Quebec League draft. I know that, and there's obviously a reason why he did. He does look pretty athletic as well. I mean, you
yeah
mentioned it, 6'4", 225. Maybe he's a project defenseman. Um, I have a friend. Well, we have a friend that watches a lot of Cape Breton games from time to time, so I'll have to ask him what he thinks as well and kind of go from there.
yes, please do.
But yeah, but no, that's a good shout because I've heard his name before. I just haven't really like watched him or paid attention to him too much. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a huge fan. He's a guy who's jumped up my boards like crazy. I think I had him early to mid second round before I really started watching him, and he's firmly in my first round now.
yeah, I'll have to watch him a bit more. I'll
Yeah.
take your word on that.
So we've got a couple honorable mentions that we're just gonna kind of like run through and not talk too much about. These are guys that might end up by the time we do mock draft 3, that these guys might be guys we talk more about. We've talked about Tanner Howe and Leo Salim Wallenius and Juracek, I think, from our previous video. But there's a couple of guys that are on the fringe there. But as a fun thing, me and Nick decided to pick one player each that we don't have going in the first round, like neither of us have going in the first round, and then kind of just highlighting the fact that we think these two guys might go in the first round at some point this year. Just because we really like them as a player. I'm gonna let Nick go first with Max Swanson, because I know he's got
Okay,
a lot to say.
yeah, Max Swanson. He's pretty small. He's 5'7". He's 150 pounds. He reminds me a little bit of Denver Barkey, and Barkey's having a real strong year in London. Last year, he's more of a pure playmaker, and you kind of expect that. Well, I shouldn't say expect that. I mean, Cole Caulfield's pretty light as well, and he's a pure shooter. But um, with Max Swanson, he's offensively creative. He's kind of in the same mold as a Trevor Connolly, and he's produced really well the last couple of years. in the USHL. He's been on the mender. He's been a point per game player, and he'll also be at the University of North Dakota with Boisvert. So I think that little combo there is going to be really, really deadly with a pure playmaker like Swanson and a pure shooter like Boisvert. He's an underrated skater. I just think he's going to fall in the draft just because of his size, but I don't think size is really all in the all in all when it comes to prospects. I mean, we've seen that from time and time again, but I think it shouldn't go overlooked just how talented he can be and how he can really change the game as well. He plays for the Fargo Force, who's normally a pretty good program in the USHL as well, and he's one of their top players. So I think he's a player to keep an eye on. I did have him in the first round. He's just fallen outside of my first round now because I'm starting to like Boisvert quite a bit,
Mm.
um, but Swanson is a legit player as well. Oh, I was gonna say about Thomas Lavoie as well. I'm big on a guy like EJ Emery who's not in
Mm.
here as well. So I think EJ Emery's a guy that doesn't score a ton, but he's got a lot of upside. Could be potentially a good shutdown guy in the future. I just forgot to mention that. But
Oh yeah,
anyways,
for sure.
um,
Yeah.
no, that's pretty much all I was going to say. The only last
Oh,
thing I was going
okay,
to say
sounds good.
was he's a 2006 birthday as well. He's 18, so one of the younger players in the draft. So we'll see with him. I think Central Scouting ranked him 130th, which is quite low for me, but we'll
Mm.
see. We'll see.
Guy I like a lot is Eric Matejko, and he's kind of the opposite of Max Swanson. This guy is 6'4", 210. Um, he's just, I think he's really big. He's got good skill, and he can once he gets going, I think he can really move. Like he's like his top speed is probably is like pretty high up there, and I think he tested pretty well at the CHL's
He
top
did.
prospect. Um,
Yeah.
he uses he uses his frame really well. He's got enough skill that he can go at defenders one on one, and because of his size, he can protect the puck. Defensively, I think he's fine. I don't think is anything to write home about, but I think it's pretty good. He's really physical. He hits with his size, and I just think that this is a guy that you can play in your bottom six. He's big, he's fast, he's skilled, and he hits, and he's not a negative defensively, and he's disciplined. That's the makings of a bottom six player right there. So for me, two QMJHL guys near the end of the video in Lavoie and Matejko, both 6'4". I guess I'm kind of old fashioned.
Yeah, definitely. There's just players here I like as well that are in the honorable mention, like Thomas Galvas I had in the first round. He's a fun player to watch. Um, Leo Celine Warlanius, another fun player to watch. Beckett Seneke is a guy that I think is going to fall in his draft, but I still think he's a first round talent. I think he's just got a lot of skill to his game, a lot more than some other players that are potentially going to go in the
He
first
played
round.
well at the CHL game too.
He did, yeah, yeah. So I think he's been a little bit snake bitten. He can be a little bit hot headed at times as well. He had a pretty lengthy suspension, I think, at one point of the year for spearing a guy.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
probably not the best thing, but and then Greedon as well, I think, is the highest USHL producer among all the draft eligibles so far, so that's noticeable.
Mm,
And then you like Charlie Elliott quite a bit as well. I'm starting to like him a little bit too. He's a really good skater for his size, but
yeah,
um, apart from
yeah. I
that,
got
there are
yeah.
so many prospects we could talk about. We got to stop at some point. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with Thomas Galvis. He was my guy to watch on Chechnya for the World Juniors over Juracek. And then, funny enough, Juracek went down with an injury, and Galvis
yeah,
stepped in and played really well. He was number 20, but unfortunately, Nick here only sent me his top 30 and not top 32, and so I didn't
whoops.
give any points to him. So he might have been able to actually sneak into the top 25 spot if we had done that. But honestly, low key my fault. I was just a bit too lazy to go ask Nick what the other two players were. But yeah, no, there's a lot of great players. And let us know, guys, what you think what you think about our picks and our rankings in the comments below. We are on Twitter as well at Breakaway Scouts. I think Nick will have the
Yeah, that's
handles
the
for that.
ad. Yeah, the ad is Breakaway Scouts because someone has Breakaway Scouting. I try to find the guy. I can't find him anywhere. But yeah,
Yeah,
Breakaway
so
Scouts, the ad. We just made it this year, so
yeah, and
we'll be tweeting a
mine
lot
is gonna
more.
be at Ryan Ma reporting, and I think I'm probably gonna be dropping my top 100 sometime in the next month or so. So keep an eye out for that. But definitely follow the main account, Breakaway Scouts at Breakaway Scouts. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you guys next time.